Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third breakaway session in the Electrum room. And I would like to invite our panelist and moderator for this next exciting topic, discussion on risk. Nkateko Mabaso, Mavis Mahona, Andy White, and our moderator, Naniki Ramadi. And they will be discussing planning for failure, risk, recovery, and leadership in payment crisis. Let's all give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason, and welcome to the Radio Shift. I hope we're not going to make you fall asleep, and the topic can be interesting enough to keep you awake. But I think if we look at the important things in our lives, you need to eat as an essential service. You need to buy medicine. In order to do that, payments are a very core and fundamental capability that enables you to do that. Now, today's topic, we've got Andy White. I think you've met Andy White. He's in South Africa from Australian PayNet. We are here to abuse him and find out what's happening in South Africa so that we can learn from it. And then we have Mavis, our regulator. For those of you who might not know, I think there's a lot of collaboration in the industry, and it involves the regulators paying. So definitely, that's why the regulator is very important in terms of enabling us to do some of the work. And then we have Nkateko, who's Chief Risk Officer at Pay Inc. And they said they will find me if I say Bank South Africa, guys. So because the payments are very key in terms of enabling you to do what you need to do on a daily basis, I guess none of us would think of a time where you can't use your card, and especially not be able to use it over a number of days. So we are going to play a bit of a video to show you that actually there can be a scenario where payments are not available, and you can imagine the chaos that can actually happen once that capability to buy food and even pay whatever payments you need to do is not available. So can we have the video playing out, please?
From app to online, card to cash. For Barclays customers, this is turning into a weekend of financial pain. Problems accessing banking services first began on Friday morning. Now, more than 24 hours on, thousands, like Casey, are still impacted. She was up till midnight trying to transfer money.
Just cut off and said that there was having issues. It didn't say what issues it was. And when it says that it hasn't gone through, you think, why is it declining? What was going on? And then obviously that's not paid.
It's worrying.
It is very worrying, especially as a parent. It is very worrying because the school won't be able to pay their lunches and things.
Barclays hasn't said just what's caused this technical problem. In a statement, the bank said, we're incredibly sorry for the ongoing technical issues that are impacting our customers' accounts. Some may see an outdated balance, and payments made or received may not show. We're working hard to fix the issue, and customers should not try to make the payment again. It's not known exactly how many of Barclays' 20 million retail customers in the UK are affected. There is never a good time for a banking outage, but this one comes on what is payday weekend for millions of people across the country. Significant too, because of just how long it's gone on for. This is the latest IT problem to hit a major UK bank. From house completions to buying baby food, it highlights our instant dependency on a banking system increasingly online only, not on the high street.
It's something that we all should be prepared for. If you think about anything that we're digitally hooked up with, you must always have to have a plan B. That's not going to help people who are having problems today. But when I've been asked over the many outages that have happened in the past, my suggestion is always, have a card from another provider that you could use in an emergency.
Barclays says it would ensure no customer is left out of pocket by the outage. It'll comfort for many who tonight are still unable to access their own money. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
Now, I guess you can think about the scenario in South Africa in terms of what would happen. With some of our political aspects, you might find that there are lootings and a whole lot of things that can happen. Now, the context of this is that Barclays Bank is a very big and global bank with over 20 million customers. And this scenario happened over month end. Month end for most of us, you're receiving your salary. A lot of people, by the time you get closer to month end, the cupboards are either empty, the fridge is empty, so you basically need to buy food. So if this scenario was to happen, there would be a bit of a chaos. I guess it shows even the importance of leading the supply chain, because in order to do a whole lot of things, the starting point is the capability to do payments. Now, we want to bring this home and just get a sense of how you feel about this. And there are a couple of questions I would like to indulge you in terms of going to the app and responding to the questions. There are 3 questions that you're going to ask, and I sort of like have an expectation of the type of responses we'll get, but you just never know. So the first question is, do you think whether the split happened in SA? Might seem obvious, but I think it's very important to see what the audience thinks about this.
The crises.
Are you able to flag the responses, or are they still answering it? That. Well, I like that, just to be different. But it is obvious this can happen in SA. If it was able to happen to Barclays Bank, which is a very well-known bank, and this was not about because there's load shedding or there's a blackout like the Venezuela scenarios where because of the blackout things collapse. This was just a normal day for everyone. So it can happen to us. And then I can see now it's gone down. It's only 2% that think this could not happen. But yeah, good luck to those who don't think it would happen. South Africa. Let's move along to the next question. In terms of whether you think this is a bank-specific or an industry problem. You can answer yes if you think bank-specific, no if you think industry problem.
In here, the answers are showing. Okay.
So 23% I think is a bank specific. So only if it happens to bank A, Barclays Bank, that's your problem. Sorry for you. We can assist our customers. 75% think this is an industry problem. I think when you look at it, definitely the banking sector as a whole, we need to actually look after it. Stability for the country depends on the whole banking sector. So I like the fact that a majority of you think this is an industry program, because it is exactly that. You know, we can't say bank A, sorry, our customers can actually transact. Your customers might move to us actually, because, you know, this is an opportunity again. The last question, colleagues, I think do you think collaborative contingency planning is required to respond if we were to encounter this in SA? There's a lot of collaboration that is happening currently, and as I mentioned, and I think just to sense check whether, do you think there's benefit in that, or does it even delay finding a solution should you encounter this?
Answers?
I like that. And I think it brings us to the questions that I'm going to ask my panelists. Collaboration is important, and Andy, you can see the reveals that in Australia, there's a lot of work that has been done, and collaboration, what they call that.
whether it be through the initiatives driven by your government, your Treasury Department, and even utilizing the various networks, including Australian PayNet. So can you share with us in terms of the initiatives that Australia has actually begun to modernize resilience and make sure that your payments ecosystem is more resilient?
Yeah, I'll focus in on main one really, which is industry resilience initiatives. So that's a collaboration between our four major banks. To start with, we've now added our major financial intermediary, Gospel, to that mix as well. Plus the banking regulators, APRA, largely because they have carriage of the relevant operational risk standards, CPS 230 in Australia, and the Reserve Bank as the payments policy regulator. So we're facilitating that initiative. It's interesting. I think your introduction was great, by the way. So it starts with premise, sorry, the 2% you said no, but it starts with premise that a bank can go dark, which we think is entirely realistic. We're ambivalent as to what the cause of that outage might be. So it might be, as it was in the case of Barclays, they were doing a technology upgrade and that upgrade fails, and they got past the rollout point. So it could be bank caused. It could be, as you saw in southern France and Spain recently, it could be an electricity outage, not load shedding, just an electricity outage. It could be similarly a telco outage. It could be a complete third-party event. So if you think back to CrowdStrike, where a lot of our screens went blue because all of our companies were using this technology that we probably never heard of called CrowdStrike. So it could be something like that. So we're ambivalent as to what the cause is, which we're much more about the outcomes, which I'll come onto in a second. But the scenario that we're running with is that bank is out for 5 days. So it's a significant event. We deal with sort of outages during the day, if you like, differently. But this is a 5-day outage. And then we're focusing on exactly the things you mentioned. So it's all about the consumer from there. So the customers of that bank that is dark out, how do they continue to make payments using their card? So that's through enhanced standard processing of the card schemes, and that's our international card schemes, but also on domestic debit scheme in Australia. It's how can they continue to get cash out of an ATM, and if that's their preference, again that's that standard processing step. But that's ATM. And this is probably the trickiest bit, how can they continue to get payments that they're reliant on? So again, remember the Barclays scenario was over a payroll weekend. How can I get my payroll? If I'm on welfare, how can I get my welfare payment? So that is, can those files be redirected? Could they be manually processed rather than processed in an automatic fashion? Or could we potentially issue digital cards to those consumers so that they can get those payments? So we're very, very focused in on that scenario, and as I say, the impacts on those consumers.
Thank you. Maybe just to know, I was about to say the time was over, but I can just now go over time.
Inbuilt resilience. We got it on time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, Angie, there are a couple of beneficial outcomes to this initiative. Do you care to share just key aspects of these?
Yeah, so I think one of the points there is that it's now working as an initiative. It's a really good. You mentioned the word collaboration. It's a really good collaboration across those groups, and we plan, by the way, to add our central bank's banking department to that mix, because when we follow those welfare payments through, actually a lot of those welfare payments come from obviously government departments, and most of them are banked by our central bank. So we need to consider whether it's actually the Reserve Bank that's out for five days, and similarly we need to think about settlement system being out, so we need to provide that through. But it's a really good collaboration amongst that group, so it's working really well. One of the other benefits, which is a bit of a side benefit, is that it's meant we've become much more rigorous about the way we go of, no one call them ordinary crises, but crises that aren't as severe as that. You know, a bank has an outage for 2 hours, or a payment system has an outage for 2 hours. So we've always had carriage of that from an industry coordination perspective. Although that was in the CrowdStrike example, interestingly, that was threatened because almost everybody tried to do the right thing because everybody had their screen go blue. So we literally had government departments who'd never set up a crisis call before setting up crisis calls and inviting us, our members, to those crisis calls. So you have, 15 crisis calls where it's actually you want one. And so one of the things that we've done off the back of the Industry Resilience Initiative is that we created a new function within AusPlanet, which is called Industry Resilience and Crisis Management, which has industry backing. So to create that has to be funded by our members, but it has the backing from regulators as well, so that we're the single source of truth if it's a crisis like that. As that happens, it's our job to coordinate that. And so I think that's really beneficial because you remove that duplication. And frankly, from our perspective, you also remove the risk that it's sort of half of somebody's job or is done on the side of their desk. And now we have a dedicated function that does nothing but that, and therefore does all of the testing around that kind of collaboration that you talked about in one of the questions, in anticipation of an event. Let's run through the likely scenarios, let's test them so that we're not walking into a crisis with no playbook for this.
Okay. And I think that's where we find ourselves as South Africa, to say, what can we learn from other countries? And Andy, when you go on such a journey, there's always lessons learned. You try and test a couple of things and you think it would work for your context, and you find that this didn't work and you check it off, and then you find something that works better. So what would you say were some of the lessons you've learned along the way in terms of the journey itself, and even some of the challenges that you've encountered in implementing the initiative? And what can we learn as SK from those challenges and the lessons learned?
Yeah, so this is there's sort of, as you hinted at, there's positives and negatives as we've gone through the journey. So one is that I think this definitely requires, and the answer on question 3 was pretty clear. It requires collaboration. It actually requires public-private partnership. In my idea, you can't do this just to apply the sector. You certainly can't. It was interesting. Question 2 was different, wasn't it? Because some thought, well, we could just do this ourselves, and you can't do it on your own. You definitely need that kind of collaboration, that public-private partnership. It also requires really good facilitation. So we've had to get the right people on board to do this. So I say that because this Industry Resilience Initiative has been around for a few years in Australia. And to start with, it was sort of the industry and the 4 major banks and the regulators getting together without us in the room. That didn't really go anywhere for reasons that I'll describe in a second. And then they put it into one of the payment system operators. That didn't really go anywhere either. And then it came to us, and we've now got real momentum behind it. So it requires some facilitation. And back to the sort of people side of it, you need the right people in the room from the get-go. So from industry, from regulators. So we're pretty serious about this when our steering committee meets on this. It's the assistant governor of our Reserve Bank, and it's their clearance at the prudential regulator, and it's CRO level at the banks. And part of that is so that this is appropriately funded. You've actually got the decision makers in the room that are going to pay for this, which we think is really important. You need the payment experts there as well, who understand how standard processing works and those sorts of things. And I'm probably going to offend any technologists in the room. You don't want technologists in the room, at least not to start with, because they're going to want to build something to solve for this. Let's build a distributed ledger that will solve for all this. Let's not do that. Because one of the other learnings is that you need to be really clear on scope and phasing. Geeta talks about the elephant in the room. This is the big elephant. You could think of in terms of the number of scenarios that you could run through. And so we're very deliberate about, what scenario we're thinking about, what's the phasing of this, what we're dealing with when. And part of that is also boundaries around it. So we run the risk of being a bit of a victim of our own success because we've had the regulators say to us, could you do the same thing but for telcos being out or electricity being out? And my flippant comment is, well, we're called Australian Payments Network. So we sort of deal with the payments bit. But we're very happy to talk to our peers in those industries and help them through it. So yeah, so those are kind of some of the challenges and methods.
Wow. Yeah, I guess one day we aspire to find ourselves where you are. And maybe bring it home from the regulator's lens. We have actually had, not specifically in South Africa, but even in the SADC region, we have encountered certain incidents that impacted our resilience. Looking at that, whether you're able to share the incident or not, I think shouldn't matter. But what is it that you'd say in solving for those incidents? What is it that you felt worked? What can we improve on? And what could we have done differently to actually ensure that we respond better, we coordinate better, we even collaborate better? Like what Ellie was saying, you've got 15 people calling you, and that's our worry in South Africa, that the regulator can call you from the sub, the fiscal, and everyone is calling you and is trying to get your phone. And, but what do you think has worked in the past in terms of dealing incidents?
Thanks, Leniki. And I think for me to start off, I do just want to congratulate the PASA team for such a well-organized event. All the preparations that went behind the scenes made this such a seamless preparation for us as the panel. But yeah, I think true to your question, the issue of a disruption happening to us as in South Africa is closer than you actually expect. Within our region itself, which is the Southern African region, there has been some incidences that did fall on a number of the countries within the particular region, without mentioning the specific countries, but to maybe cite the nature of the incidences, and then I'll speak to perhaps one with the learnings from those incidences. So one essentially experienced a cyber attack, and it happened during a very critical period of the year, a very important year and month to South Africans in Southern Africa. So without mentioning the month, like you can guess which month for you it was. And then the other country, they essentially experience a climate-related issue where for consistent number of days, there was flooding. And essentially, this particular central bank could not access their premises because the region in which they are headquartered was flooded, and there had to be measures taken post as in those events to evacuate. Unfortunately, they've been lost lives, etc. So maybe just then as in to reflect on what some of the measures as in that were undertaken, which I think as a community, as a Southern African region community, we've had to take into confidence. From the cyber attack as an incident, as an example, one of there's three learnings as in that I wanted as an maybe to speak to. The first one being centered around communication. So the central bank as in itself actually communicated on all public platforms. So they knew that as in their public is mainly active on which platform. In this particular case, it could be Twitter or X at the time, or Facebook, and they drove that message, they owned it. And I think it's very important because that alleviates any miscommunication. So they indicated that the awareness of the incident, that they are obviously looking into the issue and so on. Obviously at the time, they had not yet identified measures to circumvent or mitigate as in this disruption, but they owned the message. So then secondly, in concurrent as in with that, they actually raised a hand to their fellow central banks in the region. And it is quite as in known as in which central banks have built a strong cyber resilience or response capability, and they reached out into those central banks as in to essentially help them to fact find as in the issue, and it essentially doesn't to respond as into the issue. So, and I think I truly believe in that concept. So when you find yourself as in a hole, stop digging and digging further, raise a hand so that you can be assisted. And then thirdly, there was almost a certain capabilities and that within the region had been built, but it had never been utilized. And during this crisis, it was had this particular contingency measure was actually highlighted and could be invoked. So basically, it's like when you have parked your Rolls Royce and you have kept it for a special occasion, such as the matric death of your child, and this issue comes up and you now need to utilize it. And that's what as in we they did. But I think furthermore, one of the key lenses in that the region hasn't had to do is that because this particular central bank was willing as in to make this information available, the actual incident itself, how it took place, etc., there was an understanding that perhaps as a region, there needs to be consideration of collaborating in a much more structured way for such as an incident. So not only, I guess, from a response perspective, but from an information sharing perspective, from sharing of best practices around perhaps scenario planning, simulation exercises, and so on. And that actually culminated recently into a payment cert. I know I'm using an acronym, but basically it's a computer security incident response team structure, which this region has recently set up and has been approved. And essentially is to make sure that should an incident doesn't fall on one of the central bank, they come together and they collaborate. And then I think I quickly want to speak as into the other incident with regard to the climate change, whereby essentially they couldn't access us in their premises, and that elevated us in this requirement that I know a lot of financial market infrastructures as in obviously have, that you should as in have an alternate site where you can operate from and try to ensure that obviously it's quite over distances and from where your day-to-day site is. So they have obviously ensured that as in now they have that. But one of the other things is that they constantly are speaking to when they're sharing this incident that they went through is that they have elevated their climate change monitoring, etc., because this is a region that does experience a certain higher than usual rainfall during certain periods. So this has been very interesting as in to note how they have also just as in built up that capability now. So that, no, I guess
We're not far off in the we are getting somewhere. Not suppose the idea to want to, but I think even learning from those encounters has gotten us to a certain level of resilience or even coordination, at least to some point. That from an FMI perspective, I guess if we encounter such incidents in South Africa and we find ourselves desperate and things are not working, what would be the FMI's role? And I think Pay Inc. as an FMI that's responsible for
not just with us as an organization, but with our partners as well, with our regulators, fintechs, and our customer as well. And there are a number of things that we need to take into consideration to address this. Firstly, in any crisis, clarity and speed are critical. There is no time to be fumbling around looking for the policies and the processes and procedures. So I think they're going to be tested at that point in time. So we have built a solid incident and crisis management framework. And that means that the moment that something happens, we can activate our command centers within minutes. Everybody knows what their role is, how to escalate, and who makes the key and critical decisions as well. So that structure has allowed us to contain issues quickly, and in many cases to navigate, the incident, and also to ensure that it doesn't impact on the customers as well. The challenge, though, is that not everything is within our control, right? And in our environment, there could be other impacts such as power failures, turning pumps that we need to take into consideration under such circumstances. So coordination across the multiple parties becomes essential as well. And secondly, from a business continuity point of view, we've invested heavily in technology resilience. We are not buying things, Andy, to sort out, right? I'm saying that for my sake, we're not buying more technology to fix things, right? We have got a multi-site redundancy, cloud-based recovery, and automated failover capabilities as well. That allows us to restore our services rapidly. And we don't wait for the actual incident to happen. So because your plan is as good as it is if it's not tested. For as long as it's not tested, you don't know where the pain points are or where the points of failure will be. And it's not only just about systems, but people as well. They become very important to incorporate that into our culture in these instances. We also need to test how our people respond in terms of making decisions under pressure as well. So we do that quite often, and it works, right? But as we move more into powered environments and interconnected systems, we also introduce mid-dependencies as well. Things like cyber risk, of course, and third-party resilience are areas we constantly monitor and strengthen as an organization. And thirdly, and this is quite key as well, resilience is a team sport. It's not a single individual, who has to play with it. So no single player can manage systematic risk alone. We work very closely with our regulators, PASA as well, and all our partners, so that when something happens, we can respond together quickly and consistently. So those relationships built on trust, and they've been said to be the strongest aspects of our response model as well. And finally, transparency, right? Communication when something goes wrong becomes key as well. And people want to know what is happening. By being open, timely, and factual in how we communicate, it helps maintain the confidence as well. And we take that responsibility seriously and SPA, in terms of balancing the transparency, but with confidentiality, of course, when security is involved. So we need to keep that in mind. So if we're to sum it all up, FMIs like paying resilience isn't just about bouncing back after a crisis, but it's about bouncing forward, learning, adopting, and coming out stronger each time. And our job really is to keep the ecosystem steady, even when the unexpected does happen, through readiness, collaboration, and trust. So that's how we protect not only the flow of payments, but confidence in what keeps our economy going.
Thank you, Ndade. I think we can at least sleep at night knowing that the unit at least, even if something was to happen as a financial markets infrastructure, definitely you do have a plan in place. Now, Andy, and I want to leave time for questions. I have seen the questions. Maybe just to tell us, what do you think are the key enablers? You've heard we do have something we want to elevate it further. What are the key enablers in terms of building more resilience in an ecosystem, from an ecosystem perspective? And even including the regulatory aspects, because I can see a lot of the questions are around regulation. Would regulation be one of the enablers to make this swept?
Yeah, so I think regulation is helpful. So there's a few regulations that we're very cognizant of as we face into this work. So I mentioned one of the CPS 230, which is the relevant standard around operational risk that's set by our prudential regulator, and if you like, that's the regulation on individual financial institutions to make sure that they're resilient. But, we're conscious that may not be enough because we're talking about an ecosystem problem and potential third-party risks and so on. So that's one. Then similar to the point about financial market infrastructures, there's a regulation around critical infrastructure in Australia called SOCI. It's not payment specific, it's not financial services specific, it's about all critical infrastructure, and that feeds through to our equivalents, so our product and payment systems in Australia, but are regulated on the back of infrastructure bill. So if you like, you've got banks, and then you've got the payment system operators that are regulated, and that's helpful. But remember, we're talking about a wider industry, and hence the title Industry Resilience Initiative. And then the third bit, which is really interesting, and I think we've learned quite a lot from other jurisdictions on this actually, and kind of unrelated or slightly adjacent industries. So our Reserve Bank had 2 sets of statistics that it publishes or asks to be published. So one is about the uptime of its own settlement systems. So it publishes that, so it's very clear and transparent if there is an outage. And the second one is it asks all of the main financial institutions to publish on their own websites their uptime for their different nodes, if you like, in payments. So you could be out on real-time payments, but put up on card payments, for example. And so that creates a discipline around ensuring, if you're the financial institution that's bottom of the league table, given it's a team sport, bottom of the league table, then you've got an incentive to raise your game and drill those averages if they're regular. But I don't think regulation is enough. But that's okay, because I think I'm not a banker, but if I were a banker, I would think that I probably have a pretty natural incentive to make sure that I don't have outages, because if I have outages, I'm not servicing my customers, and if I do it too often, those customers going to, as the gentleman in fireplace thing said, or just get yourself another car, they're going to move to another bank. So that natural incentive, I think actually that's ultimately what brings our banks to the party on this, rather than the industry aspect.
Okay. So definitely. And I think all of that works in coordination in terms of enabling the whole solution. I do want to take a couple of the questions. One of them is speaking around communication, whether the Industry Resilience Forum or the function that you spoke about, is it responsible for communication around any industry material, industry east-end, or?
So we have a communication aspect. So you mentioned communication and the need for clarity. I think that is really important. The facts of the matter is, when we're fortunate that we haven't had one of these types of incidents. We have a communication plan around them, and it's a bit like everything else. We play for scenario planning and testing and so on. But I think the answers to that would very much depend on the type of instrument is. You want to have thought it through, but it may be that if it's an individual bank, they actually will own that communication with their customers, rather than us going. And also, as the industry body, we don't necessarily have the best channel to communicate with certainly the bank's customers and maybe with other wide stakeholders. So it may not be us to own the channel. We may choose to own the messaging, and then messaging get forecast through various channels.
Yes. And I think when it comes to transparency and even trust, keeping those consumers, the men in the street, informed about the incident is important. A lot of times you find that things are kept quiet because the bank is trying to solve for it, but the consumer out there is left in the dark. One of the questions is around, and I see there are questions around what we can do in SA. There's a question around how can we include the township financial architecture in order to minimize risk to the system. We know that a lot of times, especially in the township, that's where we want people to start utilizing the payment systems versus just using cash. So how can we, and maybe Katebo, from in perspective, how do you see this inclusion of the ecosystem in the township to ensure that we elevate resilience and we can solve for the issues that they might encounter?
Yeah, and I think for us, right, here's the development of PayShell. That's what it's supposed to address, right, such matters. But what we need to keep in mind when we develop and design, is what could potentially go wrong. Not just bit at the shiny product at the end, but understand that innovation and resilience are not opposites. really, but they work hand in hand as well. So they are partners. If we want faster, smarter, and participating systems, they have to be secure, scalable, and recoverable by design. So we design with the end in mind, So with that being said, when we are sitting around the boardroom tables designing, who's sitting around the boardroom table? Do we only have the techies around, or do we also bring, the man on the street who's supposed to be the user of that product, and then we incorporate that into our design. So I think that's part of key, as we said, what we can do differently to ensure that it is a product that is going to be able to say sustainable, including the lamb on the street.
Okay, that's quite good. I guess I'm trying to stick over some of the regulations part because Andy, you have answered that. One question is, what are the most old vulnerabilities that can actually result in a crisis? We know that a lot of times we think of a power blackout, or we think of the MNOs not being able to provide the connectivity. But what is it that we are overlooking as a potential crisis causal factor? Maybe Andy from your side, and then maybe I would like to hear your view as well. And Kate, go last.
Well, I'll be really quick, because I said at the start, we're behind the blemish or cause. It's all about the impacts and the impacts on the end consumer. So, and that's pretty deliberate, because we didn't want to spend any of our time going, well, we've worked out all these causes, or we almost that doesn't matter. We just got an outage or deal with that outage from the impact. You guys.
Yeah, so really, I think for me, I wanted to just as an add, I think we realize that we are operating in a very dynamic landscape. So the risks that generally we would know that they will cause disruptions and change. So you are dealing with risks not just emanating from a technology perspective. You may have political instability as a risk, you have climate-related as a risks, and so on. So we need to be, I think, as a much more better at monitoring as in the landscape and thinking of specialized risks in a different way, and make sure that our scenario plannings are considered as an auto space, not just as in technology related as a best.
I think also in preparing for the next crisis, right, we need to move from risk avoidance to adaptive resilience, right? And instead of trying to predict everything that it potentially go wrong, we can also focus on building systems and teams that can adapt quick to the unexpected that might happen. We are in a world where data is very topical. AI-driven monitoring is very topical. How long these days? How do you adapt to those, to help us think about what should potentially go on in features are?
Thank you. And I think colleagues and colleagues, because you are in this room together, this shows actually that, and I like your toys and comments, you should not try and avoid that, because it's going to happen. There will be an incident, but how do you ensure that you are prepared for it? And you think outside of the box in terms of the learning from global entities and what has happened out there, and how do we bring it back home and note even our own nuances and SA, example, the looting, and people can't use the payment systems. Everyone is always looking for a reason to loot. So that's why for us it's very important to ensure that we are resilient, we can be spoiled quickly, and have the man in the street in our minds as we plan for these days. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you so much to the panelists.